Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you our take and our debrief from last night's school board meeting and everything going on around it right now. How are you doing today, Heather?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Like I said in our other video, well rested because the board meeting didn't go till 10 o'clock last night. It was very short, very succinct. So happy to provide this recap and analysis of what went down last night. So we covered this in our shorter video, but last night, like I've already mentioned, the board meeting was really, really short, which is a blessing for us in terms of just being able to hear a quick, short meeting and be able to have dinner with our families and have a little bit of downtime. But there's still so much that's going on right now in MPS, and we're not exactly sure if we got a full view. So last night we had probably 30-40 minutes of public comment. We had a couple of quick votes or we had the superintendent comments. Then we had a couple of quick votes from the board, and we were out by like what 6:30, not even maybe. So um, let's talk about what we did here. Heather, what were some of your early reactions to public comment last night?
You know, I I heard some public comments where people were expressing legitimate concern and asking legitimate questions, and I think that it is this is a time where like we need to know, and I think for the teachers and the parents who called in with actual like here's what I want you to think about. Like there was a parent who called in to talk about like high school requirements right now and how we should think about that. And I was like, yeah, gosh, that yes, we should be talking about that. We have to really start to think about what are we going to require for high school students who are going to miss probably an entire year of education for them to graduate. And I thought that was really good. I also heard a lot of sensationalizing and a lot of dramatic talk and a lot of demanding and a lot of anger, a lot, and I'll just specifically name this white woman rage in comments, and I found that disheartening. I found that if I just kind of keep, as I watch these meetings and as I watch people demonstrate, and when they're really in heightened states, and I see that the way they're talking, leaving comments, leaving recorded public comments, I just think that's not our best. That's not our best. And that's not what we want to do as we're coming into hard conversations with each other.
Yeah, I we've said it here multiple times that we think it's completely fine and valid for teachers, parents, whomever to express concern. We very regularly express concern publicly. But I think there has to be an element to respect in it. And I think there has to be an element of like, we're all trying to do really hard things in a really difficult time. Um, and so I was, yeah, like you said, I was listening for what are the valid concerns. I was trying to peel past the emotion and peel past the dramatics around what was being said, or around how it was being said, and really focus on what was being said. And I
Mm-hmm.
heard, like you said, a lot of legitimate concerns and a lot of things that ring true to what we've experienced in following Minneapolis public schools, where the presentation in the boardroom is really encouraging, really great, whatever. But then there's a breakdown between what was told to the board and what actually happens in the building. And this isn't just in talking about our return to in-person school. This happens when we talk about literacy. This happens when we talk about distance learning. This happens when we talk about budgets, right? All of the time we have like, this is the rosy best case scenario of what we're hoping to happen. And then when things break down because we don't have enough things in place to make sure that everything is happening as they're supposed to happen, and we don't have contingency plans when they don't, we end up with some really valid concerns that we were hearing teachers and maybe and parents bringing up last night, around walkthroughs that may or may not have happened. We're hearing about class sizes that aren't capped to what they were promised, just lots of different things. And I think the other frustrating part of this is it's not like these are new concerns that the superintendent didn't know about or didn't hadn't heard of yet, and these were just the first time that they'd come up. But we didn't hear any response from the superintendent or from anybody saying like, this happened, this didn't happen, this is true, this isn't true, and here's why or here's why not, right? And so it gets really really difficult when you're trying to get a sense of like, we know people are emotional, we know people are upset, you don't want to contribute to them, you obviously don't want to call, say that they're lying if they're not, or if they are, you want to respect people's fears and understandings, but also parents and the community members need to know what is going on in this district, and we can't just have one person telling that story. And I think so that was really frustrating for me to I think that was one really frustrating part. And then, it's not a new development because, like I said, it's happened over and over and over again. But in this context, it's another development around, we just want to know what's going on and everyone needs better information. Um, and I just thought that was a missed opportunity yesterday for the superintendent to set the record straight for everybody.
Yeah, and one of the things that we see kind of happen over and over again is in the absence of them not telling their own story, other people are quick to insert, or other entities, and then they get their slant on it, right? And so, my encouragement to the district would be like, tell us what the plan is. Then also, like, we can handle it if you tell us that it didn't happen perfectly, right? We understand that this thing is messy and difficult, and we've never gone, we're asking our school district to like do things more equitably. We're asking them to redistribute, programming and opportunity. We're asking them to do this during a pandemic. We recognize that there's not this school system out there right now. You can be like, oh, that's the school that is achieving everything that is our agenda. I mean, America's really broken and our education system is really broken and there's not a lot of good examples. We get that. But just like be honest about where the shortcomings are so that we can build trust. Trust isn't about like, here's the perfect plan that nobody can criticize. Trust is like, here's where we messed up and here's where we're trying to do better. That's how you rebuild trust. I just feel like tell us where the soap isn't in the buildings. Tell us where the hand sanitizer didn't get installed. Tell us about the classes that are too big and what you're trying to do about it. Talk to us about the fact that, I can segue just a little bit, talk to us about the fact that like some of these distance learning classes are having 40 kids in them and we don't really know what we're doing yet. Like, just tell us that. We're aware. We don't like it either. We're trying to figure it out. We all know that we've never done this before. But I just feel like in the absence of naming both our plans and our shortcomings, that it erodes trust when we could be building.
Right. And I think, and we've been pretty critical of the way that Minneapolis Federation of Teachers has really carried themselves throughout all of this, and 100% stand by that, because I still think some of the things that we heard people again call the superintendent and the board members, some of the board members, which was weird, dishonest, again last night, right? And I think that that is a problem, and I think everyone needs to just take a step back, and I think everyone's so determined to prove to somebody that they're right, and understand like the first person to be vulnerable is probably going to be the one that creates the most trust and has the most strength in this relationship. Because if the superintendent can just for a moment pretend like, or can stop pretending like, hey, everything's going fine, or and not acknowledge any of the concerns or any of the failures that have taken place, and say like, we need to work on it, we're trying our best, like that would be great. But also the union's not doing a great job of creating a space where the superintendent can feel like he can be vulnerable. And the frustrating part is the people who lose in that situation are students. That's the number one group that loses in that situation. But it doesn't stop at just students. Students lose, parents lose, teachers lose, and only people really winning in this chaotic situation are people who think, yeah, Minneapolis public schools can't do this. Um,
Mm.
and like that is a huge problem because if we can't admit to where we're coming up short, then we can't solve that problem. And so I think that's where we're just running into a lot of issues is the union doesn't want to create space for the for the district to be vulnerable, and the district is responding by not being vulnerable. So we're just not going to solve any of the problems. So that's, I think that's where it's really frustrating and hard to watch.
Yeah, I think there's just like I think we all have this responsibility because we have a group of students that we have historically marginalized. And I think one of the things that frustrates me the most is like when I start to see people like talking for like, oh, this is how this person's harming and this is how this person's harming. And like the reality is both like every and all institutions are not above self-reflection and looking at like what they need to be doing that is better. And maybe that's where we should start in a moment like this, because I just feel like we are so gridlocked, we are so entrenched in this really liberal, really democratic city. We are as entrenched as like the country is right now about like how we are going to do what's best for students. And I think that we need to see the leaders of these institutions come back to best practice, come back to a set of values. How do they want to be remembered, right? What is it that they want people when they look back at these things? What is it that we want to be true for the students of this city because of comments that I made? And I think we got to come back to that, to like who is the voiceless person in the room.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people, obviously, the people in power have benefited from the status quo. And so the status quo works well enough for them. And so, they aren't going to challenge it, right? Like, and this isn't pointing at just one person. This isn't pointing at the superintendent. This isn't pointing only at, the MFT president Greta, right? Like, this is both of them. This is everybody that, and, we're only going to get past the status quo around students of color not getting what they need in order to be successful, and Minneapolis continuing to fail students on a regular basis, and letting things like the pandemic only put us further and further behind. Like it feels like we're committed to this ship sinking rather than, figuring out like we would rather let the ship sink than saying like we need to work together. And it's like I said, it's just costing everybody way too much. It's costing the city way too much at this point. And it's frustrating. Like even yesterday during public comment, it's so frustrating because on one hand, you have everyone saying all the nice, beautiful words, social emotional learning, equity, school climate and culture. And then you see the way that our adults in our system are talking to one another. And then and like these are people that you're supposed to respect and you're supposed to have mutual respect for. And then just imagine when you put in children in that situation who you're supposed to have, you technically have power over, like where are we going to get? And I think that's the big problem, and where I don't see a way forward. And I'm not saying this in the sense of like, let's be hopeless, but I don't see a way forward in the way that we continue to operate with each other. At some point, like you need to get over your fears and call out what's wrong, because otherwise the people who are impacted by what's wrong are just going to continue to suffer. And if your fear is more important than their freedom, then continue to live in fear. Like that's where we're at this point.
Yeah, and also in the meantime, like the valuable resources of time and energy and planning that we could have spent last week preparing for buildings were all spent in fighting over how this was going to look. Even the live Q&A that I attended, that the district put on for parents could hardly comment in that comment without, every time I tried to ask like a very specific question, it was like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teachers responding, like, right, with the same talking points again and again and again, fast and furious. And I'm just like that you cannot have a conversation when you do that, right? And so I just keep thinking to myself, like, how would both of these groups of people discipline students for behaving this way? That's what I keep thinking about over and over again. And how in the world do we expect students to show up differently? Students of color who've been through an insurrection, watching a murder, watching our city burn, sitting in their houses. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have kids who are coming in to buildings right now who've been through a lot in this city. And if that is the example that adults are setting for them right now, then we are not going to meet their needs when they walk in these doors. And so I just think, like, yeah, I mean, I don't really necessarily have like solutions other than like look at yourself honestly in the mirror and be like, this is how I'm showing up in this moment.
Yeah.
Is this my value system? Am I behaving in my value system?
Yeah. I really call upon, Superintendent Graff and senior leadership team and the executive board, executive committee for MFT to just get over themselves and recognize, like, your all of your success is dependent on each other. And if y'all are successful, then kids will be successful, right? And really, actually, if kids are successful, then you'll be successful. You'll have happy teachers, you'll have a happy community, and it doesn't need to be this combative. And it's just really frustrating to continue to watch and see, but it is where we're
Well,
at.
and I would say too that I would call on teachers who don't agree with the way that some teachers are behaving to be like, I'm going to at least say that I don't think this is right. I do think there's like, at some moment, some of us have to just be like, you know, a friend just messaged me that the other day. I wrote a comment in social media and I was really angry at the person I wrote a comment for. And she was like, you know what though, Heather, that comment's too far because we don't believe that this is the way that we should behave, even when we're angry. And I was like, you know what? At first I wanted to justify it. I wanted to be like, no, because this is what this person did, dot, 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 dot. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Actually, that is outside of my value system. And it's really easy to get dragged there when we're angry and dragged them when we think we're right. And I really appreciated that friend saying to me, like, that's not how you want to behave. And her having the courage and the love for me to say, like, remember, this is how we agreed to behave online. That was us building each other up to be better. And I think that, like, I would call on all of us to think about courageous conversations with each other on an intimate level. Like, is that your best? Is that, and just like check each other, because that's what we're asking kids to do all day long right now.
Yeah, I think that, and I think this we should move on because there's other parts. But I think that we're seeing, yeah, just all of this. Like, you can support each other in terms of what someone is saying, right? In terms of, like, yeah, your concerns are valid and real, just like we did. And you can also say, like, and the way, like, you're out of line in some of these other ways too, right? And I think that's an important distinction, right? And I also think that, maybe you don't have enough love for the teacher, who said that one thing, or like, yeah, that's another teacher from another building. I don't really know them. That's not really my problem. My kids in my building, in my classroom are good, great, and the adults around them are great. And I mean, that's an approach to definitely take. But if you love the kids in Minneapolis enough, like, you will stand up and say something. And I go back to your love for, the kids in Minneapolis need to start outweighing your fears. Otherwise, this ship will continue to sink faster and faster and faster. And so I think that's where we're just doing a real disservice to students right now, is there's not enough courage in the city to challenge the status quo. Um, and that's why I think the city really loves the status quo, because we can go ahead and we can vote for Ilhan to be our representative and then treat kids of color like shit here. And that's real.
It's
Um,
real.
And so,
Even if you have a Black Lives Matter sign in your yard, you can spend all day long figuring out how you can get out of a global majority school placement.
right. And so I think like we need to stop looking past, or we need to start looking past the like vanity around us being such a progressive liberal city and say like, how are we treating our most vulnerable people? How are we, what opportunities and outcomes are we creating for them to not be vulnerable, right? And to,
Hmm.
to be successful, to do the things and experience the freedom that so many people in Minneapolis enjoy. Um, and that means owning what you can own and doing something different, um, or continuing to do the great things that you are doing, right? Like there are people doing great things in Minneapolis, and there's no doubt about that. But we're not moving the ship because so many people are so entrenched in the status quo and benefiting from what has continued to happen. So it's hard. But there was another conversation last night that we did want to highlight briefly. We promised to keep this brief, which was about the board focus areas. And so last night, the board approved a resolution that would mean that the topics that they're going to focus on for the entirety of the year, or for most of the year, will be around literacy, which includes curriculum, instruction, and evaluation. They'll be talking about school climate and culture, which, like we referred to before. And then they'll be continuing to talk about the CDD implementation. And so we wanted to just react a little bit to that. Again, if you watched our shorter video, you caught a small glimpse of what, my concerns were just about the process. I'll start. I think overall, those are good priorities, good focus areas to have. We need to, continue to talk about school climate and culture. We need to continue to talk about CDD implementation, how that's going, continue to monitor that. And we need to talk about literacy. So I'm good with what was ultimately chosen. I just think there was a missed opportunity to have a conversation with the community about what the community thought should be a focus area, and what we know that there's been a big push specifically by white parents in Southwest Minneapolis recently around literacy, and now it's become one of the three focus areas for the board. And we've seen presentation after presentation in committee of the whole meetings that talk about literacy. And I would just be curious, with everything going on, what else would people want us to be talking about right now? What else would the board want, or what else would people want the board to be learning about and asking questions about and probing into? I just think there was a real missed opportunity for folks to engage in that process as well.
Yeah, I know our coalition had things that we asked about, right? We made sure that we collected consensus on that. And a couple of the things that we saw not make the list, one of those examples was learning loss. We had a strong consensus from our coalition that they wanted to understand what we were going to do. And yet I kind of can see like we didn't have literacy working before this, so maybe we can't talk about learning loss because I don't know which one comes first. So, but I do think you're right, and that this would be an opportunity to take in like what are the concerns the community has, what is it that families of color want to talk about right now. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, learning loss is definitely one thing that I think both of us agree, like, just feels really timely in the middle of the pandemic, talking about bringing students back to school, because we know that in-person learning is going much better than distance learning, or was going much better than distance learning has been going. And we know that in-person learning actually wasn't going that great to begin with. But so yeah, learning loss is definitely one thing. What else do you think could have been potential topics that should have been a part of the conversation at the very least?
Maybe this is another cart and horse thing, but we want to talk about climate and culture, but it feels like it's hard to really talk about climate and culture when we aren't talking about building leaders principles, specifically associate soups. What are their roles? What is accountability? I just know that the variance amongst schools and your school experience changes dramatically based off of who your principal is. And so it feels like until we start to talk about building leaders, what is a priority for building leaders? What are we asking from them? Do they have to have site council meetings? Do they not have to have site council meetings? who's on their site council, all of those kinds of things. We have all of these policies about how building leaders are supposed to run their buildings. Where we don't have is what it feels like is actual accountability, or places where we can, show that building leaders are or are not making those goals. So it feels really complicated to get to climate and culture without talking about that. But maybe that'll turn up as part of the conversation. I never know which. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I sincerely hope that building leadership becomes a part of the conversations for all the focus areas, honestly, because building leadership, absolutely needs to be playing a hand in literacy instruction, curriculum, and evaluation in a building. Building leadership absolutely has everything to do with school and climate and culture. And when, like you said, if your experience in a building is so different based on who your building leader is, that to me feels antithetical to the CDD, because what the CDD was supposed to also be bringing was a universal MPS experience. And I think, if you have a better or worse experience based on who your principal is, it feels like the role of the principal has to be something that's really focused on during the CDD conversations as well. And I don't think we've learned or heard enough that, about the role of principals in the CDD, honestly. So I 100% agree with you. I have a couple of different things that I think, also could have made the list in terms of at least what should have been a part of the discussion and how we're weighing all of this. I think, and we talked about this a few months ago during the board conversation around finances and the, budget process. But year after year after year, we have CFO Giap talk about, oh, we have other structural issues beyond enrollment in our
Mm-hmm.
budget. And I just get so frustrated because certain board members specifically only want to talk about enrollment, and then another group of board members only want to talk about what's coming from the state. And we never have a conversation around structurally what can we do in Minneapolis public schools that is within our control. Like, what do we need to do in order to fix some of the structural issues of our budget? And that feels like something that should be worthy of our attention, especially as we anticipate, dips in enrollment continuing, after the CDD passes, and everything like that. So I think that was something that I personally, again, me nerd, wants to want to be a part of the conversation. I also think that, when we are talking about in this, and I don't know how this would have looked, but we have brought this up now multiple times again, also, is the accountability structure around who is holding people accountable from top to bottom in this
Yep.
district, and how does that actually work? Because again, the board gets an amazing presentation. I could see why people would be bought in, and I can see as a board member why I would vote for something that was presented to me. The problem is it does not take place in the classroom, right? And the intention around what's presented in the board doesn't actually end up, being the reality for students and parents in the classroom and teachers in the classroom. Um, and so I think that, really examining, the hierarchy and like the accountability structures within the district and what's going right, what's going wrong, feels like something that could have impacted everywhere in the district, like every issue in the district, because that continues to be a theme that we keep seeing as like where breakdowns continue to happen. So I think that that could have been another, really nerdy conversation for the board to take up. Yeah, I mean, there are just so many different things. And we could have talked about suspensions. We certainly could have talked about, special education being a focus, right? Like there are just a million different things, obviously. And so, you know, I understand, if everything's a focus area, nothing's then a focus area. I get that. But I just think that there could have been a conversation with the community in order to come to like, yeah, what are the things that we really want to focus on and hear about this year? And I don't disagree with school and climate and culture and the CDD implementation and literacy all being things that um, the district focuses on and the board focuses on this year, because those are all really active projects that are taking place. But there are other things also that I'm sure were thought about, but just weren't talked about publicly. So
It was really surprised at how fast that vote went, that no one had comments about it, and maybe it's because they were rushing to get to that. But I was kind of like, oh, this will be a big discussion. Not everybody's going to be on board with these things, and we've heard different board members object to lines of questioning about literacy, and so I mean, or like just we know that some board members were very anti CDD. So I mean, the fact that like those all just went yes, 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 and boom, and it's done. Maybe they had lots of conversation before the vote, but it just seemed really fast. I don't even disagree with them, but I guess I would just like to know more about the process. Since we spent as a coalition, we spent more time talking about it than the board did publicly.
yeah, I can't get over the learning loss thing though. Like we're gonna experience, and everyone said it, right? Like everybody said, like this year is gonna cause years and years of impact on students learning, um, and we're not like that's not gonna be a focus area. That seems odd to me. And I've received no indication, honestly, that MPS is talking about learning loss at the senior level or wherever, right? And so I think that is a concern for me, especially as we start thinking about going back to school, especially as we start thinking about hopefully, knock on wood, federal money coming to Minneapolis, more federal money coming to Minneapolis for education. So I don't know. It's that, you know, for all the things that I mentioned, that one feels like a big glaring, like, I don't know how that one, like, I would love for us to talk about principles. Do not get me wrong. I would love for us to talk about, and Lord knows I'd like to talk about accountability, but that just learning loss just seems like a real immediate issue that we need to evaluate and solve for, like, now, and we need to start planning for now. And I just haven't heard about any appetite to actually figuring out a way to address it. Which doesn't mean that hasn't happening, right? I don't know everything that's
Yep,
happening.
that's right.
They could be having a lot of conversations. There's been nothing I've heard nothing that's indicated that, and hopefully me saying this here means that they'll start talking about it more publicly. And maybe we have no influence and we're just talking to each other. So
That's probably more likely.
yeah.
Well, it was a short meeting, but there's a lot happening. I think that's what we're both saying.
Yep.
There's a lot happening. It is a critical time to stay attuned to things in Minneapolis public schools. It is also a critical time to be staying in connection with our state legislator as they're making decisions about learning loss and money and how much money is going to come with that. So don't get sleepy, even on those short meetings.
Yeah. There's a lot said in our shortest meetings. So there's a lot not said intentionally. So well, thank you, Heather, for taking the time to listen last night and do this with me again. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. So stay ready, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, Heather.
Thanks. Same to you.
Bye.